The trek to the laboratory, brief as it was fraught with maddening dread. The shadows cast by the fantastically gibbous moon were 10 times as hideous as they had been in the rays of the sun. Paradoxically, the illumination granted by our meager lanterns did little to put us at ease. Rather, we felt that they were doing more to display our presence to the ravenous monstrosity that we knew must be lurking beneath the darkness. We should also have been pleased to not have heard any demoniac howling, or the heavy breathing of a gargantuan ape amidst the blackened forest, but at the horrible, fiendishly perpetual silence, we felt only terror. As we neared the laboratory, we turned our lights upon its vine-grown walls. It was a 2-story modular structure, though without interior partitions to accommodate the bulky machinery and apparatus. The door on the northern wall was slightly ajar, though thickly laden with vines and roots. Bracing ourselves for whatever lay within, we cleared away the vines and entered. Much to our fortune, we found that most of the electric lights were still functional when we tried the switchboard. The lab, as we had expected, was a shambles. Instruments of examination and experimentation lay strewn across the floor, along with a few scattered notebooks and overturned tables. In one corner of the room was the expedition's long-range wireless outfit, a heavily dented and disfigured primary coil owing to cessation of transmissions. At the center of the room was Van Buren's augmented continuum drive. The robust time engine bore no apparent damage at first glance, but a closer inspection of its inner workings by myself and Stewart revealed the cause of malfunction. 3 of the stasis tubes in the primary array of the regulator circuit were burnt out, a small but disastrous defect which had caused the entire circuit to fail, resulting in a catastrophic overload of the warp field generator. We had seen the horrific effects of this meltdown when we first beheld the island, and shuddered to think that such tremendous deviations from the very laws of reason could have been sparked by the failure of only 3 small mechanisms. Moving to the far and unilluminated side of the room, we came across the specimen pods, all of which were vacant. By the shatter patterns of the glass, we gathered that some of the escaped subjects had freed themselves, notably the sea lion, the crocodile, and the chimpanzee. But most of the pods appeared to have been broken open from the outside. There were 1 or 2 dried pools of blood around the pods, marking where the beast's prey had and hadn't managed to escape. Oddly enough, there did not seem to be any traces of human remains to be found in the lab. I was about to radio Atkinson and the Hysteria when I was startled to the point of stark panic by a frightful cry. The cry had been that of Technician Ellison, who had gone to examine a dark corner at the end of the room where the operating lights did not reach. Not a second later, the rest of us had raced to his side and shone our lights upon the floor. The initial shock was merely a nauseous reflex, but soon the supreme horror became all too unbearably apparent to us, and the weaker of constitution among us had to pause to steady our frantic breath. It was not immediate danger that paralyzed us, for the thing illumined by our lamps was quite past all harming power. It lay before us in the same loathsomely butchered state, and bore the same clawing and bite marks that we had seen on the crocodile and the crew of the albatross. But the implications of this thing bearing those same gruesome wounds were so maddeningly horrible that it is a wonder that we did not turn about and sprint back through that hellish forest to our ship and fly away from that blasphemous, time-cursed island of terror. Would that we had. The mutilated thing before us was slightly larger than its average kind, but there was no question that it had once been a chimpanzee. The horrendous notion that something more monstrous than that which we had first conceived could be brooding, bloodthirsty and relentless in that nightmare jungle was so unthinkable that it did not take long for all 6 of us to agree to return to the ship. For the island was not large, and surely the longer we lingered in the furtive blackness, the more we risked running afoul of that nameless terror. We knew now what had caused the transtemporal calamity, and the fate of Van Buren's company was beyond doubt. If the crocodile, the chimpanzee, and the crew of the albatross had fallen prey to the horror, then the doctor and his scientists and researchers would not have long survived. Nor would we, if we remained. As 4 of the technicians in our party gathered what salvageable notebooks and apparatus they could find, I radioed Atkinson's party and the Hysteria's crew to tell them of our grim discovery and decision to withdraw. Almost instantly, the Hysteria radioed back, applauding our decision and telling us to set off immediately, and to keep our lights up and bright. Atkinson did not confirm that he had heard us, so I repeated the message and asked for a response, but none came. With mounting anxiety, I called back again for Atkinson to respond, but no word came back. Frantically, I now repeatedly called out Atkinson's name over the radio, but I was still unanswered. This raised a troubling dilemma among our party. Whilst we could not help but fear the worst after all we had seen, it was entirely possible that Atkinson's team had merely lost their wireless transmitter in the undergrowth, or that it had been damaged, or even that they were in a place where our radio signal could not reach. Unlike Van Buren's ill-fated expedition, Atkinson and his company could very well be alive and beyond the reach of communication. With great hesitancy, we elected, though not unanimously, that we must try to locate Atkinson's party before returning to the ship. The expedition's living quarters, where they had been headed, was only a quarter of a mile to the south of our current location, and if they had ever reached their destination, it would be only a short walk to the south to confirm their safety. Before setting off, we radioed the Hysteria's party to notify them of our decided course of action. Almost instantly, a reply came back, urging us to disregard Atkinson's team and return directly to the ship. As sincere as this warning was, we could not abandon Atkinson's team without making an attempt to locate them, and this we informed the Hysteria. This time they responded, saying that they would search the expedition's huts for Atkinson and his men, but we must turn back immediately. I replied frankly that we were obligated, as officers of the authority and as decent men, to certify the safety of our comrades. As we stepped outside the laboratory, brandishing our arms and lanterns, we noticed that the wind had picked up drastically. The frightful howling and the writhing, swaying moonlit canopy made for a harrowing spectacle, and perhaps it was the primal exhilaration of mortal dread that drove us forward, but we pressed on without faltering at any step. Some of us, I imagine, were unconsciously holding their breath. Through the trees ahead of us we could see the moonlight reflecting off the roofs of the huts, and instinctively quickened our pace. Then the wind changed direction, and we could hear it, the sure and unmistakable sound of rustling among the stalks and vines behind us, and by their rhythm we could only judge them to be footsteps. At the first impression of this horrible sound, our last vestiges of composure were shattered, and we set off running frantically through the vine-choked thicket towards the cabins, regardless of the noise we made, and without looking back.